Adanna sat quietly in the dim bar, her heart pounding as she watched Amara lean in close to Chidi. They were talking in a way that made her feel uneasy. Everything around her seemed to fade away as she realized how serious things had become, spying on her own husband because she was scared and unsure. As the tension grew, Adanna started to doubt herself, wondering if she could really face the truth she was so afraid of. It felt like her whole world was about to fall apart, leaving everyone on edge, eager to find out if her worst fears would come true or if she had made a terrible mistake that could ruin everything. The Lagos morning sun shone brightly on the shiny glass doors of Renaissance Trust Bank as Adanna walked through, her heels making a quick tapping sound on the marble floor. She smiled at the security guard, hiding the nervousness she felt inside. As she walked toward the elevators, she noticed her co-worker, Funmi, looking at her with a face that seemed a little too sympathetic. "Good morning, Funmi," Adanna said, trying to keep her voice calm even though she felt uneasy. Funmi answered after a slight pause. "Morning, Adanna. You look... well?" The hesitation in Funmi's voice made Adanna feel uncomfortable. She forced a bigger smile and stepped into the elevator, feeling relieved when the doors closed, leaving her alone with her thoughts. In her office, Adanna sat down in her chair, which made a soft creaking sound. She opened the financial report she had been dreading, scanning the numbers carefully. Mistakes jumped out at her. She was halfway through correcting them when her phone buzzed. A text from Chidi. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Adanna's fingers hovered over the screen, thinking of many possible replies. In the end, she put the phone down without responding, feeling the anxiety in her stomach grow. Needing a break, she headed to the break room for some coffee. As she got closer, she heard voices gossiping. "Can you believe it?" Blessing's voice sounded excited. "He was caught with his secretary in a hotel room." "Men," Ola said with a scoff. "They're all the same. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile." Adanna froze, her hand on the door handle. The conversation was too close to what she was afraid of herself. Blessing noticed her first, eyes widening. "Oh, Adanna, we were just talking about the weather." "Right," Adanna muttered, moving to the coffee machine. Her usually steady hands shook as she poured, and the coffee spilled over the rim, staining her crisp white blouse. "Oh no!" Ola exclaimed, rushing to grab napkins. "Here, let me help." Adanna waved her off, forcing a laugh that even she could tell sounded fake. "It's fine, I've got it." She went back to her office, the stain on her blouse a reminder of how upset she felt inside. Sitting at her desk, she tried to focus on the report, but the numbers became blurry. Without thinking, she opened her drawer and touched the edge of a framed photo. It was from their wedding day. Chidi had his arms around her, and they both looked so happy, so in love. When had things changed? Or had they changed at all, and she was just imagining it? A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Mr. Okafor stood in the doorway, his large figure filling the space. His face looked angry. "Adanna," he started, his deep voice full of disappointment. "I just got off the phone with Johnson & Co. They're threatening to pull their account." Adanna felt her heart sink. "Sir, I—" Mr. Okafor held up his hand, stopping her. "I don't want excuses. I want results. Fix this, Adanna. Your job depends on it." As the door closed behind him, Adanna slumped in her chair, trying not to cry. Her computer chimed, signaling another problem that needed attention. She took a deep breath and tried to focus. She couldn't let her personal worries affect her work. But as the day went on, it became harder to keep that focus. Adanna rubbed her temples, her eyes drawn to her phone. A photo from Chidi's recent work event, stared back at her. He was standing close to a colleague, a beautiful woman Adanna didn't recognize. They looked comfortable together, sharing jokes and smiles. Adanna felt a lump in her throat. She had been the last one to leave that night too. As she packed up to leave, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Chidi. "Sorry, love. Dinner with clients. See you tomorrow." In her car, Adanna sat still, the key in the ignition. Memories of Emeka, her ex-boyfriend, suddenly came back. She remembered the shock and pain of discovering he had cheated on her, and the humiliation that followed. She had promised herself she'd never be in that situation again. But here she was, feeling doubt creep into her heart. Adanna shook her head, trying to push the memory away. She started the car, the engine's quiet hum offering little comfort. As she drove out of the parking lot, the lights of Lagos blurred around her, reflecting the mixed emotions swirling inside her. She was heading home to an empty house, and the night ahead seemed long and lonely. At home, Adanna paced back and forth in the living room of their modern Lagos apartment, glancing at the clock every few seconds. It was 11:30 p.m., and Chidi still wasn't home. She nervously tugged at her sleeves, her mind filled with worries. The sound of a key turning in the lock made her stop in her tracks. Chidi stumbled in, his suit wrinkled and his eyes tired. He gave Adanna a quick kiss on the cheek, smelling like the airport and old coffee. "You're late," Adanna said, trying to keep her voice calm. Chidi grunted and headed to the kitchen. "Long flight." Adanna followed him, leaning against the doorframe as Chidi drank a glass of water quickly. "How was the trip?" "Fine," Chidi mumbled, not looking at her. "Just busy." His phone buzzed on the counter. Chidi glanced at it, frowned, and then turned it face down. Adanna felt a knot form in her stomach, but she didn't say anything. As Chidi walked toward the bedroom, Adanna followed behind him. "I had a tough day at work," she started, hoping he would listen. "Mr. Okafor was—" "That's nice, honey," Chidi interrupted, his voice distant. He started unpacking his suitcase, tossing clothes carelessly onto the bed. Adanna watched, feeling more and more uneasy. Suddenly, a small gift box fell out of the suitcase. Chidi quickly grabbed it and stuffed it into his drawer before Adanna could see it clearly. "What was that?" Adanna asked, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. Chidi's shoulders tensed. "Nothing, just work stuff." Adanna sat on the bed, twisting her fingers in her lap. "Is everything okay at work? You seem stressed." Chidi's face softened a little. "It's fine, just a big project. Don't worry about it." Before Adanna could ask more, Chidi's phone rang loudly from the kitchen. He quickly left the room, leaving Adanna alone and confused. Adanna quietly walked to the bedroom door, trying to hear Chidi's quiet conversation. Her heart beat faster as she caught bits of his words. "Not now," and "she doesn't know." When Chidi came back, his face was red. "Work call," he said quickly. "I need to send some emails. Don't wait up." He kissed Adanna on the forehead and disappeared into his home office, closing the door softly behind him. Alone in the bedroom, Adanna looked at Chidi's drawer. The gift box kept bothering her thoughts. She reached for the handle but then pulled back, shaking her head. Hours later, Adanna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. The clock showed 2 a.m., and she could still hear Chidi typing in his office. She rolled over, pulling the covers tightly around her. A single tear slid down her cheek onto the pillow. As she began to fall asleep, one thought kept running through her mind. What was Chidi hiding? The next morning, Adanna's heels made clicking sounds as she walked through the high-end supermarket, looking at the shelves carefully. She was searching for the best ingredients to make jollof rice with grilled fish, Chidi's favorite. She picked up a ripe tomato, feeling it to make sure it was just right. Everything had to be perfect. At home, Adanna turned the dining room into something special. She spread their nicest tablecloth over the dark wood table and set out the china they got as a wedding gift. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm light, while gentle high-life music played from the speakers, filling the room with memories. In the kitchen, Adanna stirred the rice, remembering her mother's recipe. The familiar smell of spices filled the air, but it didn't help calm her nerves. Her phone sat on the counter, silent. She kept glancing at it, hoping to see a message from Chidi. Finally, she gave in and sent a text. "Surprise waiting for you at home. Don't be late." As soon as she sent it, she felt unsure. Was she being too eager? Too demanding? She set the phone down and tried to focus on cooking the fish. An hour passed slowly. The food was ready, steam rising from the dishes. Adanna started pacing, her excitement turning into worry. When her phone finally buzzed, her heart jumped, but then she felt disappointed. Chidi's message said, "Sorry, love. Big crisis at work. Don't know when I'll be home." Adanna sank into a chair at the dining table, feeling crushed by disappointment. She looked at the beautiful setup she had created, watching the candles burn lower and lower. With a heavy sigh, she leaned forward and blew out the candles, leaving the room in darkness. She poured herself a large glass of wine, her hands shaking a little. The balcony called to her, offering a break from the quiet apartment. Outside, Lagos stretched out before her, a sparkling sea of lights. Adanna sipped her wine, letting the cool night air calm her. A memory came to her mind. Their wedding day. She could hear laughter and see herself and Chidi, young and happy, feeding each other cake. The memory faded, leaving her alone with the busy city below. Back in the kitchen, Adanna slowly packed away the food that hadn't been eaten. She paused, holding Chidi's favorite serving spoon, a wedding gift from her parents. It felt strange in her hand, as if it didn't belong. In the bedroom, Adanna changed into her pajamas, moving slowly. She looked at Chidi's side of the closet, where rows of his expensive suits hung neatly. She ran her fingers along the sleeve of one, remembering how proud she felt when Chidi got his big promotion. But now, the fabric felt cold and distant. At her vanity, Adanna took off her makeup, bit by bit. She looked at her reflection, noticing the fine lines around her eyes that had appeared recently. When had she started looking so tired? Later, curled up in bed, Adanna scrolled through old photos on her phone. She stopped at a picture from their last vacation, both of them smiling brightly, arms around each other on a sunny beach. It felt like it had happened a long time ago. With a sigh, Adanna put the phone aside and turned off the light. She pulled the covers tightly around herself, very aware of the empty space beside her. Chidi's side of the bed was untouched, a reminder of the growing distance between them. The next day at lunchtime, Adanna's favorite cafe buzzed with chatter and the clinking of cups. Adanna sat alone, tapping her fingers nervously on her coffee mug. She kept looking at the door every few seconds, feeling a mix of excitement and worry. Ngozi suddenly came through the entrance, her bright, colourful dress standing out against Adanna's plain business clothes. She saw Adanna and waved, making her way through the tables with ease. "Adanna, darling!" Ngozi called out, giving her friend a warm hug. "It's been too long." As Ngozi sat down, her smile faded. She leaned in, her face showing concern. "What's wrong? You look like you haven't slept in days." Adanna opened her mouth to talk, but then closed it again. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's Chidi," she finally said, her voice very quiet. Ngozi's eyebrows went up. "Chidi, what's he done?" Adanna told her about what had been happening. Chidi staying out late, the secretive phone calls, and how distant he had become. As she talked, her voice started to shake more. And then there was this gift box he tried to hide from me, Adanna finished, trying not to cry. Ngozi's face grew serious. Men, she said angrily. They're all the same. No, Chidi's different, Adanna said softly. He wouldn't he? Ngozi interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. My cousin thought the same about her husband. You know what she did? She hired someone to follow him. Adanna pulled back in surprise. A private investigator? That's too much. Before Ngozi could say more, they heard a loud argument at a nearby table. A young woman was standing up, yelling at her boyfriend. I saw you flirting with that waitress, she shouted. Don't deny it. The boyfriend tried to explain, but the couple quickly left. Adanna and Ngozi exchanged a knowing look. Ngozi leaned in closer, speaking quietly. Look, I'm not saying Chidi's cheating, but if you're this worried, maybe you need to find out for sure. What do you mean? Adanna asked, feeling a knot in her stomach. There are ways to test if he's being faithful, Ngozi said carefully. I know someone who can help with that. Just then, Adanna's phone buzzed. It was a text from Chidi. Sorry, love, have to cancel this weekend. Big project came up. She showed Ngozi the message, her hand shaking a little. Ngozi's eyes narrowed. Adanna, you deserve to know the truth. Here, she said, pulling a business card from her purse. This is Amara. She's an actress, I know. She's done this kind of work before. Adanna stared at the card, her mind spinning. I can't believe I'm even thinking about this, she whispered. Outside the cafe, Ngozi hugged Adanna goodbye. Think about it, okay? And call me anytime. As Ngozi's bright figure disappeared into the Lagos crowd, Adanna stood still, looking down at Amara's card, turning it over in her hands. With a deep breath, she slipped the card into her purse. Just in case, she thought to herself. Just in case. A week had passed since Adanna's talk with Ngozi, but it still weighed heavily on her mind. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the kitchen as Adanna softly hummed a tune. She was carefully placing sliced fruit on 2 plates when she heard Chidi's quick footsteps. He came into the kitchen, his tie crooked and briefcase in hand. Morning, love, Chidi mumbled, giving Adanna a quick kiss on the cheek as he grabbed a piece of toast. Running late? Adanna's smile faded a bit. I made your favorite omelette. No time, Chidi interrupted, already heading toward the door. Thanks, though. Don't forget, dinner tonight, Adanna called after him. I made reservations at that new place you wanted to try. Chidi paused with his hand on the doorknob. Right, dinner. I'll be there. Promise. The door closed, leaving Adanna alone with 2 plates of carefully prepared breakfast. At work, Adanna kept checking her phone every few minutes, hoping for a message from Chidi. The quarterly report on her screen blurred as her mind drifted to worrying thoughts. Adanna. Mr. Okafor's deep voice startled her. I need those projections by lunch. Is there a problem? She sat up straight, forcing a professional smile. No, sir, you'll have them soon. As Mr. Okafor walked away, Adanna's phone finally lit up. Her heart jumped, but then sank as she read Chidi's message. Need to talk. Important. See you at home. The rest of the day passed in a fog of anxiety. Adanna left work early and went to a nearby boutique before going home. She came out with a new dress, remembering the saleswoman's words. Perfect for a romantic evening. The sound of keys in the lock made her heart race. Chidi came in, his face serious. We need to talk, he said, his tone serious. Adanna felt her stomach drop. What's wrong? Chidi took a deep breath. I have to go on another business trip. It's last minute, but I can't pass it up. I leave tomorrow for 3 weeks. The evening she had planned fell apart. 3 weeks? But what about... I know. I'm sorry, Chidi interrupted, avoiding her eyes. It's a huge opportunity for the agency. I have to go. As Chidi started talking about the trip, Adanna's mind wandered. She remembered what Ngozi had said at the cafe. There are ways to test his fidelity. The business card Ngozi had given her felt like it was burning a hole in her purse. Adanna? Chidi's voice brought her back to the present. Are you okay with this? She forced a smile, hating how easily it came. Of course. It's a great opportunity for you. Chidi looked relieved, but Adanna felt a little hurt inside at how quickly he accepted her answer. Later, as Chidi packed upstairs, Adanna sat alone in the dimly lit living room. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she stared at Amara's number. She replayed the evening in her mind. Chidi's distraction, his avoiding eyes, the sudden trip. With shaky fingers, Adanna began typing a message. Every word felt wrong, but the doubt in her heart was too strong to ignore. As her thumb hovered over the send button, she knew this was a big moment. Whatever choice she made now would change her marriage forever. She took a deep breath and pressed send. The next day at lunchtime, the busy cafe was filled with the sound of people talking, but Adanna only heard the fast beating of her own heart. She fiddled with her coffee cup, her eyes constantly looking at the door. The coffee in the cup had gone cold, untouched. A young woman walked in confidently, and many people looked at her. Adanna's heart skipped a beat when she recognized her. It was Amara, the woman Ngozi had shown her in a picture. Amara noticed Adanna and smiled kindly as she walked over. Adanna? Amara's voice was smooth and pleasant. I'm Amara. It's nice to meet you. Adanna struggled to find her words, the speech she had practiced disappearing. Yes, Thank you for coming. I'm not sure how to... This isn't something Amara's expression softened. She sat down across from Adanna, moving with grace. Take your time. I know this isn't easy. Adanna took a deep breath and looked Amara in the eyes. I need your help to test my husband's faithfulness. As Adanna explained her worries, her voice became steadier. Amara listened carefully, nodding now and then. When Adanna finished, Amara leaned in, her voice kind and understanding. I've been where you are, Amara shared. My ex-fiancé. Well, I wish I'd had someone to help me find out the truth sooner. Hearing this made Adanna feel a bit more comfortable. She pulled out a photo of Chidi. This is him, she said, her finger touching Chidi's smiling face. He usually goes to the Genesis bar after work on Fridays. He likes whiskey, neat, and he can't resist puns. Amara looked closely at the photo and asked questions about Chidi's habits. As they talked, Adanna's phone buzzed. Chidi's name appeared on the screen with a heart emoji. Miss you, love. Can't wait to be home. Adanna's hand shook as she put the phone down. Amara noticed. Are you sure about this, Adanna? Amara asked gently but seriously. Once we start, there's no going back. Adanna closed her eyes, thinking about the sleepless nights and the doubts that had haunted her. She took a deep breath and nodded firmly. I'm sure. I need to know. They spent the next hour planning. Amara explained how she would approach Chidi and what signs she would look for. Adanna listened, feeling both interested and scared. As they were getting ready to leave, Adanna's phone rang. Her sister Chioma's name appeared on the screen. Adanna excused herself and stepped away to take the call. Adanna, are you okay? You sounded strange in your message. Kioma said with concern. Adanna hesitated, then the words spilled out. She told Kioma everything, her worries, the plan with Amara, her fears. "Oh, Adanna," Kioma said, shocked. There was a long pause. Are you sure this is the right way? Have you tried talking to Chidi?" "I need to know the truth," Adanna insisted. "Will you help me? I need an excuse for Friday night." Another long pause. "Okay," Kioma finally agreed, though she sounded unsure. "But promise me you'll be careful. This could go very wrong." Adanna returned to Amara, who was waiting patiently. They shook hands to confirm their agreement. Amara's handshake was firm and professional. "I'll handle everything very carefully," Amara promised. "You'll have your answers soon." As Adanna watched Amara walk away, she felt a mix of emotions. She twisted her wedding ring, which suddenly felt heavy on her finger. The busy Lagos street buzzed around her as she stood still, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she was finally on the path to finding out the truth. With a deep breath, Adanna stepped onto the crowded sidewalk, blending into the flow of people. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Adanna paced back and forth in the living room, holding her phone tightly in her hand. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, making her feel even more stressed as she struggled with a decision. After a while, she took a deep breath and called Kioma. As she waited for her to answer, she nervously played with the edge of her blouse. Kioma arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a large bag over her shoulder. She hugged Adanna tightly, feeling how tense her sister was. "Oh, Adanna," she whispered, pulling back to look at her. "Are you really sure about this?" Adanna nodded and led Kioma to the coffee table, where she had spread out a bunch of disguise items. There was a wig, sunglasses, a scarf, and various makeup products laid out like pieces of a strange puzzle. "So," Kioma said, picking up the wig, "how do you want to look? Chidi's not going to recognize his own wife with this platinum blonde hair, is he?" As they tried out different combinations, Kioma's frown grew deeper. "Adanna, this is crazy. Why can't you just talk to Chidi?" Adanna's hands froze, and she stared at her reflection in a small mirror. "You don't understand, Chi. The late nights, the secretive phone calls. It feels like what happened with Emeka all over again." Kioma was about to argue, but Adanna's phone buzzed, interrupting her. Adanna showed her a text from Amara, confirming the details for Friday night. Kioma's lips tightened, but she nodded reluctantly. "We should do a practice run," Kioma suggested, her experience as a nurse making her want to be prepared. "The Genesis bar, right? Chidi's favorite place." At the bar, Adanna was visibly nervous. She went in first, the wig itching her head and the sunglasses slipping down her nose. Kioma came in a few minutes later and sat across the room where she could watch. Adanna tried to act casual, but it didn't go well. She almost spilled her drink when someone bumped her elbow, and she muttered an apology in a voice that sounded too high. Kioma watched and shook her head in concern. Back at the apartment, Kioma didn't hold back. "If you keep acting like that, you're going to get caught. You looked like you were about to rob the place, not just have a quiet drink." They spent the next hour improving Adanna's disguise and practicing how to behave more naturally. Kioma's medical knowledge helped as she suggested ways for Adanna to change her posture and the way she walked. Just as they were finishing up, Adanna's phone rang. Chidi's name appeared on the screen. Adanna stepped away to answer the call, leaving Kioma alone in the living room. Kioma looked around at the mess they had made during their planning, feeling a knot of worry tighten in her stomach. When Adanna returned, her face showed both guilt and determination. "Thank you, Chi," she said softly. "I couldn't do this without you." Kioma hugged her sister tightly. "I still think this is a bad idea," she whispered. "But I'm here for you. Always." As Chioma left, Adanna stood in the doorway, watching her sister disappear into the distance. The feeling of what she was about to do pressed down on her, like a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. But there was no turning back now. Friday night was getting closer, and it would bring answers and consequences that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. At the office, the bright lights above Adanna's desk hurt her eyes, buzzing softly like a trapped fly. She glanced at the calendar on her desk. Friday's date had a big red circle around it, like a target staring back at her, making her stomach feel uneasy. Her phone felt heavy in her hand, and on the screen, Chidi's name and number were waiting. Her finger trembled slightly as it hovered over the call button. Her heart raced. She took a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Her mouth was dry. She knew the words she was about to say weren't true, but she was going to say them anyway. "Chidi." "Hi, love." Adanna's voice trembled a little as she spoke. "Listen, something's come up at work. I'm going to have to stay late tonight." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, that's too bad. I was hoping we could have dinner together." Adanna held the phone tightly. "I'm sorry. It can't be helped. Mr. Okafor is really pushing me about this report." "No worries, I understand," Chidi said, sounding a bit more cheerful. "I'll probably go to the Genesis bar after work then. Hang out with the guys." "Oh?" Adanna tried to sound casual, though she was gripping the phone hard. "That sounds nice. Enjoy yourself." After the call ended, Adanna slumped in her chair, feeling overwhelmed with guilt. She opened her desk drawer and touched the edge of a framed photo. It was of her and Chidi on their honeymoon, both of them so happy. She traced the edge of the photo, wondering when that happiness had become so fragile. As the day went on, Adanna's focus slipped. The numbers on her screen blurred, and she started making mistakes. Funmi leaned over her shoulder, pointing out an error with a concerned look. "Are you okay, Adanna? You seem distracted." Adanna brushed off her concern, but her hands shook as she reached for her vibrating phone. A text from Amara appeared on the screen. "All set for tonight. See you there." When her colleagues left for the day, chatting happily about their weekend plans, Adanna felt a sting of loneliness as she turned down their offer to join them for drinks. She watched them walk away, feeling like she was on the outside of her own life. Alone in the empty office, Adanna changed into the outfit she and Kioma had picked out. She applied makeup with shaking hands, transforming her appearance. The stranger in the mirror stared back at her, eyes wide with fear. Her phone buzzed again. It was Kioma. "Are you sure about this, Adanna? It's not too late to change your mind." Adanna paused, her sister's words echoing the doubts she already had. But then she thought about Chidi's secretive phone calls and the late nights at the office. Her determination grew stronger. "I'm sure. I need to know," she said firmly. As Adanna left the building, she nearly bumped into a cleaner. Her heart skipped a beat, worried she'd been noticed, but the woman simply smiled and continued mopping, completely unaware of the storm of emotions inside Adanna. Outside the Genesis bar, Adanna paused, watching people go in and out. She touched her wedding ring, feeling the metal turn cold against her skin. With a deep breath, she slipped it off and put it in her purse. She pushed open the bar's door and stepped into the smoky interior. There was no turning back. She had made her choice, and now she had to see it through. The Genesis bar's neon sign flickered as Adanna walked inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She adjusted her wig and pushed her sunglasses higher on her nose. The familiar smell of beer and whiskey filled the air as she looked around the busy room. There he was. Chidi sat at the bar, laughing loudly with a colleague. They were deep in conversation, their heads close together. Adanna's stomach tightened as she slipped into a dark corner booth, ordering a gin and tonic she had no intention of drinking. From her spot, she watched Chidi. He looked relaxed and happy, so different from the secretive, distant man she had been living with. A sharp feeling of guilt hit her. What was she doing here? The bar door swung open, and Adanna's breath stopped for a moment. Amara walked in, wearing a bright red dress that made everyone turn to look. Adanna couldn't take her eyes off her as Amara's gaze moved around the room, searching for something or someone. Those eyes found Chidi. A smile spread across her face, making Adanna shiver. Amara walked smoothly toward the bar, her steps light and graceful. As she passed by Chidi, she brushed against him slightly, catching the bartender's attention. Chidi turned his head, his eyes following Amara. Adanna's grip on her glass tightened, her knuckles turning white. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. Amara leaned in close to Chidi, her body language clearly flirty. Chidi's colleague got up and left, leaving them alone. Adanna's heart raced as she tried to hear what they were saying over the noise of the bar. Amara laughed at something Chidi said, placing her hand on his arm. Chidi leaned in closer, a familiar crinkle appearing at the corner of his eyes. Adanna knew that look. It was the one he used to give her. A waiter tripped near Adanna's table, his tray wobbling and almost spilling. Adanna jumped, quickly covering her mouth to stop a yelp. Her heart beat fast as she looked around, hoping no one saw her. Back at the bar, Chidi glanced at his watch, then lifted his left hand, his wedding ring catching the light. Adanna felt a moment of relief, but it vanished when Amara didn't seem bothered. She moved even closer to Chidi. To Adanna's dismay, Chidi signaled the bartender and ordered a drink for Amara. The gin and tonic in front of Adanna churned in her stomach. She thought about leaving. The pain of watching this was too much. Amara leaned in, her lips almost touching Chidi's ear as she whispered something. Adanna felt a wave of sickness. What had she done? A hand on her shoulder suddenly made Adanna jump. She turned around to see Funmi, who looked confused. Adanna? Funmi's eyebrows pulled together as she took in Adanna's strange disguise. What on earth are you doing here? Adanna's mouth went dry. The plan she had carefully put together was falling apart as she looked into her colleague's confused eyes, realizing the full weight of what she had done. Her heart raced as she quickly looked away from Funmi, pretending to be very interested in her untouched drink. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Funmi hesitate, looking confused, but then she shrugged and walked away. Adanna let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she lifted the glass to her lips. She glanced back at the bar and her stomach twisted. Amara had moved even closer to Chidi, and they were leaning in, talking closely. The sight sent a sharp pain through Adanna's chest, making her feel like her plan was a huge mistake. Her phone buzzed, surprising her. A text from Kioma appeared on the screen. How's it going? Everything okay? Adanna's fingers hovered over the keys, unsure of what to say. She typed a short, vague reply, guilt eating away at her. A burst of laughter pulled her attention back to Chidi and Amara. Chidi was smiling, and he briefly touched Amara's shoulder in a way that looked too familiar. Jealousy and hurt surged through Adanna, threatening to break the calm appearance she was trying to keep. Just then, a loud group entered the bar, their voices drowning out everything else. They blocked Adanna's view, and panic surged inside her as she strained to see Chidi and Amara again. For a moment, she couldn't see them at all, and her mind raced with fearful thoughts. When the crowd finally moved, Adanna's breath caught in her throat. Amara was leaning in close, her lips almost touching Chidi's ear as she whispered something. Chidi's face changed from surprise to interest, and Adanna felt like her world was spinning. The room seemed to close in on her. Adanna stood up quickly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her elbow hit her glass, knocking it to the ground with a crash. People turned to look, their curious eyes on her. To her horror, she saw Funmi heading toward her, concern on her face. Panicked, Adanna rushed toward the restroom, her heart pounding as she barely avoided Funmi's outstretched hand. Inside the restroom, she gripped the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She hardly recognized the woman looking back at her, torn between shame and determination. As she tried to calm down, two women walked in, their excited whispers breaking through Adanna's troubled thoughts. "Did you see that couple at the bar?" one giggled. "The tall guy in the suit and that beautiful woman in red?" "Oh my God, yes! The chemistry between them was crazy," her friend replied. Adanna's stomach turned. She hurried past the gossiping women, feeling sick. Back in the bar area, her eyes immediately searched for Chidi and Amara. They had moved to a quiet booth, sitting even closer than before. Adanna's vision blurred with unshed tears as she took a shaky step forward, wanting to confront them. But then reality hit her. What could she say? How could she explain why she was there, in disguise, spying on her own husband? She froze, realizing the serious consequences of what she had done. As she stood there, unable to move, Amara leaned in close to Chidi. Her hand rested on his thigh, a touch so intimate that it made Adanna's chest tighten. Chidi didn't immediately pull away, and in that moment, Adanna felt her world falling apart. All the reasons she had given herself for doing this fell away, leaving only the bitter taste of regret. Watching her husband with another woman, Adanna was forced to face the truth. The real problem wasn't whether Chidi was faithful, but her own deep fears and lack of trust. Adanna's heart pounded as she moved closer to Chidi and Amara's booth, her legs shaking. She hid behind a big plant, trying to hear their conversation over the noise of the bar. Amara leaned even closer to Chidi, placing her hand on his arm. Chidi listened closely, a small smile on his face. Seeing this made Adanna feel sick, and her mind filled with the worst possibilities. Caught up in her thoughts, Adanna accidentally stepped back and bumped into a waiter. Glasses crashed to the floor, echoing through the bar. She quickly turned around, her heart racing, as Chidi and Amara looked up. Adanna pressed herself against the wall, hoping her disguise would still work. As the noise died down, Adanna noticed Chidi checking his watch and then saying something to Amara. They seemed to understand each other, and Amara stood up gracefully, heading towards the restroom. Seeing her chance, Adanna moved closer. She sat at a nearby table, now close enough to hear Chidi's low voice. He pulled out his phone and frowned. "Adanna," he murmured, sounding guilty. Adanna's breath caught. What was he feeling guilty about? Amara returned and slid back into the booth, making Chidi laugh with something she said. Then she placed her hand on his thigh. The sight sent a sharp pain through Adanna's chest. Unable to take it anymore, Adanna stood up suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. She took a shaky step toward their booth, thinking of 1,000 things she could say. But as she opened her mouth, she hesitated. What would she say? How could she explain why she was there? Panic surged through Adanna. She turned quickly and nearly knocked over a group of people as she rushed to get out. She burst through the bar's doors, breathing in the cool night air as she leaned against the rough brick wall outside. Adanna slid down the wall, the brick scratching her back as she sank to the ground. The truth overwhelmed her. She had created this whole situation because of her own insecurities. Chidi wasn't the one with trust issues. She was. As the noise from the bar faded, Adanna was left alone with the heavy realization of what she had done. She had invaded Chidi's privacy, involved a stranger, and possibly hurt her marriage. All because she hadn't talked honestly with her husband. The weight of her actions made it hard for her to breathe. How could she face Chidi now? How could she explain what she had done without breaking the very trust she had been so worried about? Adanna sat there, her mind racing with thoughts. Should she confess everything? Try to pretend it never happened? Both choices made her feel sick. The neon lights of the Genesis bar blurred as Adanna hurried away, her heart racing. Her wig was crooked, almost falling off, as she shakily raised her hand to call a taxi. The cool night air did nothing to clear her mind. Inside the taxi, Adanna pulled off the wig, staring at the tangled hair in her lap. She noticed the driver glancing at her in the mirror and quickly looked away, her cheeks burning with shame. When she arrived home, Adanna rushed inside, slamming the door shut and locking it with trembling fingers. Her legs gave out, and she slid down to the floor, leaning against the door. The weight of what she had done hit her hard, overwhelming her. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. A text from Amara appeared on the screen. Mission complete. Call me when you can. Adanna stared at the message, feeling sick. How had she let things get this far? Forcing herself to stand, Adanna stumbled to the bathroom. The bright lights flickered on, revealing her reflection, a stranger with smudged makeup and haunted eyes staring back at her. With shaking hands, she began to wipe away the heavy makeup, slowly revealing the woman underneath who she barely recognized. Back in the bedroom, feeling drawn to Chidi's dresser. Adanna opened the drawer where she had seen him hide the small box. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid, revealing a beautiful necklace inside. Beside it was a note. For my brilliant, beautiful Adanna, happy anniversary. The realization hit her hard. Chidi had been planning a surprise all along. She sank onto the bed, holding the necklace close as tears started to fall, feeling a mix of relief and deep guilt. Her phone rang, startling her. Kioma's name appeared on the screen. Adanna hesitated, then answered, hearing her sister's eager voice on the other end. So, what happened? Did you catch him? Adanna opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain the huge mistake she had made? Adanna, are you there? I can't talk right now, Chi, Adanna whispered, her voice trembling. I'll call you back. She ended the call, feeling more alone than ever. Needing answers or maybe some sort of forgiveness, Adanna went to their shared home office. Her eyes fell on Chidi's work calendar, and for the first time, she really looked at it. Client dinners, late meetings, everything was carefully planned. How had she missed all of this? Sitting down in her chair, Adanna pulled out a photo album from the bottom drawer. She flipped through the pages, tracing their relationship from the early happy days to now. Their wedding photo caught her eye, both of them smiling, their eyes full of love and hope. It was then that the full weight of her actions hit her. Tears flowed freely, landing on the plastic sleeve protecting their happiest memory. Adanna had taken that trust, that love, and turned it into something unrecognizable, all because she couldn't deal with her own insecurities. As the night grew darker, Adanna remained frozen, staring at the evidence of a love she had nearly shattered. The doubts that had brought her here now twisted into self-reflection. How could she ever trust herself again? Those doubts lingered as Adanna paced the living room, gripping her phone tightly in her trembling hand. She dialed Ngozi's number, her finger hovering over the call button, but each time she stopped before making the call. This back and forth of indecision happened several times, reflecting the confusion and worry inside her. Finally, gathering her courage, Adanna let the call go through. Ngozi's cheerful voice answered, unaware of the storm about to come. Ngozi. Adanna's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. I've made a terrible mistake. As Adanna told Ngozi what happened at the Genesis bar, Ngozi listened in silence, only breaking it with gasps of surprise. The shock in her voice turned to concern as Adanna explained that Chidi had been faithful all along. Adanna moved to the kitchen, absent-mindedly rearranging things on the counter as she talked. Her hand closed around Chidi's favorite mug, and she held it close like it could somehow comfort her. I don't know, Adanna said, her voice small. I couldn't stop thinking that something was wrong. Ngozi didn't hesitate. You need to tell him, Adanna. You have to be honest about everything now. Panic filled Adanna at the thought. I can't! Ngozi, you don't understand. If I tell him, I might lose everything. And if you don't? Ngozi responded. How can you build a future on a lie? They went back and forth, discussing whether or not to confess. As they talked, Adanna's eyes fell on a family photo on the fridge, her and Chidi, hugging and smiling, full of happiness. The sight made her guilt even stronger, and her stomach turned. In the middle of their conversation, Adanna's phone buzzed with a text. Chidi's name flashed on the screen. On my way home. See you soon, love. Panic overtook Adanna. Ngozi, I have to go. Chidi's coming home. She ended the call quickly, her heart pounding. Filled with frantic energy, she rushed around the apartment, trying to hide any evidence of what she had done that night. She stuffed the wig and disguise into a drawer, her shaking hands barely managing to close the zipper. In the bathroom, Adanna splashed cold water on her face, hoping it would wash away her guilt and fear. She stared at her reflection, practicing a calm expression. Act normal, she whispered to herself. Everything is fine. The sound of a key in the lock sent a shock through her. Will Adanna confess all she had done to Chidi? Watch out for the final part. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please like and share to encourage the channel. Also, take a moment to click on the subscribe button below and tap on the notification icon to get notified as soon as the next story is posted. Until the next time, it's bye for now.